Hi everyone, welcome back to CyberTalk with Nikolay show, and on today's show we're going to be discussing threat landscape, and that's not only digital but any kind of threat landscape, and we have a special guest, Scott Scheferman, and he is with Eclypsium, so they've been in the news lately discovering different things, and Scott has been in this particular space for quite some time, and he has pretty distinguished career in threat intelligence. So I'm not going to steal his introduction, and instead of I let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background and where he's going back into. So Scott,
Thanks,
on to you.
I appreciate that. It's an honor to be on your show. We've known each other since probably 2016 or so, and it's been quite a journey even since then with the advent of AI and ML in the cyberspace. So we've shared that kind of experience together indirectly. My background is probably about 27 years in cyber, starting in the mid 90s, going back to international networking services, which kind of was the knowledge behind the network deploying all the network stack. Did my first cyber posture assessment in '97, diving into a dumpster and scanning a vampire net, token ring kind of environment. So that's how far back I go. So my genesis of security starts with network security. Did a lot of work for the Navy and DoD and some other U.S. government agencies in the context of cyber for about 17 years. So I draw a lot from that kind of experience. At the peak of that career, I was in charge of the team responsible for doing all the risk assessment for all of the Navy systems that were GenSer and below, so about 2,000 systems plus per year, and 800 validators reporting to my team doing risk assessment. So we were kind of the final risk authority for deciding whether a program could operate and support the mission or not. That was the peak of that career, but then in 2012, 2013, the Iranians got into the NMCI network, the largest network in the world at the time with over 1 million devices. And that really upset me because we had all these controls, we're spending millions of dollars. Long story short, how did they get in? Why were they able to call back? How come we didn't see the malware? How did they go throughout the network? And at the time, FireEye was really doing a good job of both sandboxing as well as C2 detection. And I was intrigued kind of by the vendor space for the first time in my career, and decided that I kind of reached a glass ceiling in terms of my ability to affect change for that mission in the Navy. And so I left for FireEye for a while and did all sorts of things with fusion centers and state and local governments, and being a solutions architect for them. And then being exposed, obviously, to the DFIR kind of scene as well, even though I'd done a lot of DFIR for Navy, including some of that weird stuff. And then I went to Silence and did all the AI. So largely the endpoint space as well, Sentinel-1 after that. And now I've been at Eclypsium. Actually, today is my 3-year anniversary, as it happens with Eclypsium, where we're really focused on kind of the next evolution of where the threat landscape has been going, largely tied to supply chain, both at the kind of strategic global level in terms of the threat landscape and all those dynamics converging, whether it's chip wars or sanctions, the re-balkanization of bringing chips back to domestically to America, for example. And in the context of all that, you're seeing threat actors, and there's even a ransomware nexus we could tie in. But here at Eclypsium, we've just really been solving via extensive research in this space, as well as the technology stack, of understanding all those threats and vulnerabilities that are underneath the operating system, like Windows, Linux, Mac, because these devices have 5 or 6 or 7 other operating systems, half of them running a full Linux stack, for which the entire industry has built their cyber stack unaware, without any visibility to those threats and all of that software running underneath the operating system. And that's really where we've been focusing a lot. The last thing I'll say is I do a lot of work with trust groups and TLP type of circles, dealing with incidents, threat actors, helping bring down bad guys and finding those guys, and drawing from that community to find research related to this IT supply chain type of dynamic we've been solving for the last 3 years.
Got it. Thank you for that, Scott. So that's definitely great career in threat intel and doing all the work that you've done, and definitely remember you from Silence Base and your stories about growlers and how Navy operated and all those airplanes when they come out and they gather threat intelligence. But I think what I'm trying to get into, maybe step a little bit back from all those gritty details of what is going on right now and give a little bit of explanation of threat intel, because people have different understanding what it is and where you're going with it and where to get it and what is actually actionable, what is not actionable.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you in direction you look, there are plenty of noise you can discover, and the crux of it is to understand the signals rather than ingest all the noise.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Threat intelligence means a lot of things to a lot of people, and it really is context dependent, as we all have come to understand. But it's really proven to provide a lot of value of late, and it's also gotten a lot harder to leverage it properly. Much to your point, because of the fact that threat actors are borrowing so much of their each other's code as well as open source code. Threat actors are poisoning the software supply chain on GitHub repositories. So a lot of people think of threat intelligence and they think right away the attribution. You know, you go into an incident, a large enterprise is getting has an incident at hand. The first thing the board usually asks is who did it? Who is the actor? What is their motive? And ironically, like honestly, that's the last thing you should care about when you're dealing with an incident, especially in the first few hours, even though it's the first question asked. Threat intelligence usually comes into play as you're doing, let's say, an incident in the context of just DFIR, if you will. As you get further into the incident, you do want to understand maybe who the actor is based on their TTPs, the actions and tactics that they've been using historically, because that might help you get telemetry on what their motive is or what to expect, or then, of course, what to hunt for in the context of containment and identifying the scope of an incident. A use case would be maybe helpful here, but before we explore a use case, but you have indicators of compromise, what we call IOCs, and largely that's the economy, if you will, of threat intelligence these days in terms of how you operationalize it. But threat intelligence does expand beyond just IP addresses and domains and C2 and malware analysis. It expands much more also into the more strategic level understanding of what an actor type might do from a motive perspective, and how those motives and objectives of an attacker can actually change mid incident, or after they've had persistence, maybe even for years, they can switch their motives. And oftentimes there's more than one objective or motive for the same actor because of this nexus between the criminal actor space and the dotted line nation state connections between those. This is particularly true for Russian, Ukrainian, CIS state type of operators, but it also plays out with Chinese nexus actors, North Korean actors as well. So understanding those dotted line connections kind of at the more actor motive level is also really important from when you set out to do tabletops, when you set out to look at your DRP plans and those playbooks. If you're not taking into consideration the current or modern and especially the forward-leaning threat landscape, your playbooks and DRP plans just won't be ready to handle a data center, let's say, compromise that puts all of the servers on the same BMC network into an infinite reset loop, or fries the BMC with the voltage attack. These are things that even 2 years ago we weren't really worrying about, but today we absolutely need to. That's part of the research on a talk I gave offsite at DEF CON last week that we can talk about. But this is, I mean, threat intelligence is very broad, but it does break down into understanding actors and motives. It does break down into like your MITRE attack. What would happen on a normal kill chain if I know who the actor is? These are the tactics they use. So let's lean forward and hunt for those during an incident or even ahead of an incident in a kind of proactive preparing mode. And then, of course, it deals with all the IOCs that flow in, and making sense of that noise is very difficult. And more often than not, mistakes are made with attribution, with understanding who an attacker might be, or what their objectives might be. So I'm kind of in the middle. I'm a proponent of threat intelligence. It does tremendous good, but it's very easy to get lost in it, distracted by it, overwhelmed by it, And especially in the case of DFIR, I'll kind of put an exclamation point on that, because you need to operate as if the attacker has any objective, and almost no matter what the attacker's attribution is, your containment needs to be lockstep with whatever the actor might be, because you don't know in the first hours of a DFIR engagement.
Got it, got it. Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. So I think from we're probably on the same page, so I'm not keen always to find out who is after me rather than what they're trying to do and what kind of techniques they're going to use. So at least I can craft my defense and get rid of whatever I'm dealing with, and then I can go and pull the thread and to the extent I can discover. So like when you talk about attribution, have you seen like from your experience any successful companies or any successful ideas or hunts that somebody actually went all the way and they pinpointed to exactly who was behind the keyboard and launching the attack? Because from my point of view, it's one of the difficult thing in cybersecurity space. It's not kinetic warfare. You don't see where the missile came from, so you always see the last mile on your network that somebody request came from this, and then you try to stitch things together, see where else you can get more information, where else this request was coming from, and how they traversed, and how many hubs they made, and how many obfuscated, and especially when you have all the stores and chain proxies and everything else, it's extremely difficult to figure it out who's coming from where and the value of the information, even if you find that out.
Yeah. So the short answer is absolutely yes. It's difficult to speak about examples just because I don't want to put myself or anybody else in any kind of spotlight or harm's way in this regard. But there are a tremendous number of people that I'm very much firsthand aware of that do get down to what you might call belly button attribution. There's an entire network of international law enforcement and government and intelligence that works nonstop 24/7 to identify and proactively address folks physically beyond what you read about with indictments from DOJ. If anybody wants to get a really good idea for attribution and what that looks like, I encourage you to read the DOJ indictments when they do come out. They're some of the best kind of ground truth information and understanding of threat actors, personas, motives, broad level tactics that you can find, because that becomes public information in the context of law. And the DOJ indictments are very, very informative in that regard, even retroactively for companies to understand, because before that moment, those cases are closed and being worked in private, so you don't get that information in this industry very easily. But yes, you know, a lot of this is stemming from what I might call a greater appetite the last 5 years or so, but especially the last year and a half or two since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to be much more OffSec oriented. So you'll find board members that are willing to pay organizations to find that belly button, or during an incident, not only am I not going to pay this time, but I want to make, I want to do something to that threat actor. I want to mess with their operation, their infrastructure. And obviously that gets on legal, unshaky ground, and it really depends what region you're in. It depends on what authority you have to operate and do those kind of things, who you're hiring as an organization to do that. But the overall dynamic is moving much more towards if you come into my house, I'm going to shoot back, right? If you break into my front door.
Yeah, that's definitely, I see it's changing, and the law that the Biden administration passed, I think last year, last year, where they essentially authorized counter strikes in cyberspace. How do you see this one? Is it something extremely good, extremely bad? Because from my point of view, there's good and bad, especially if you have operator that are not savvy enough to understand where this attack came from, and if it's not 100% sure, you can hit really badly some companies that was essentially innocent bystander and they were hijacked, and somebody launched attack from their system. So how do you see it?
Yeah. I think if you break it down into three categories, the one you addressed is one of them, which is kind of your espionage, corporate on corporate, let's say, potential scenario where there could be false attribution, false flagging on purpose on the point of the attacker. They're using that infrastructure, etc. A second one would be kind of the nation state warfare, cyberkinetic dynamic, where if you mess with that the wrong way, you can completely get in front of legitimate um, um, defense organization operations and mess those up or cause greater escalation or cannon fodder, if you will, in the context of cyber warfare. So that's a huge caution for anybody listening, like not to mess with nation states unless you're really well connected and know exactly and in coordination even. The third would be the criminal apparatus of like ransomware and extortion. And for that, I think there's a lot more appetite and a lot more activity going on to take the risk that I think I have the right person or group, and I do want to actually get back at them, for lack of better words, to use the same words we've been using. But yeah, there's a lot of danger. I do see this overall as escalation. I don't see this. I think it's born out of necessity, not out of political or even personal will. Maybe you've always felt like you wanted to get back at an attacker, but you're never willing to take that risk. But out of necessity alone, I think the industry and corporate America and even countries are realizing that if you don't take the battle forward, the existing cybersecurity stack and capability of industry and vendors to ship secure devices and code is not effective. It's not been proven effective. It's only gotten worse. We haven't gotten better. I hate saying that, representing this industry, but by and large, it's not enough. And so it's out of necessity you're seeing that escalation. And I don't think that slows down anytime soon, given the context of the kind of the regional war, the NATO war with Russia, as well as the chip war. I mean, there's a real chip war going on. That's not a meme. That's very, very highly competitive, highly incentivized geopolitical and economic dynamics at play that are making the IT devices the actual battleground itself in that context. So I see that escalating as well via supply chain attacks, both from the IT supply chain as well as to or against the IT supply chain itself. And I'd love to share some really interesting stuff in that regard.
Okay, that's great. No, yep. I guess if you're not careful enough, you can get yourself into a lot of troubles in this cybersecurity battlefield. But let's say, what would you say to organizations that are considering threat intelligence, and could you describe, like in your mind, which organization would benefit from having threat intelligence? Because again, right now you can go in a space and see where companies are, and some of them have issues, are difficulties even understanding what events they're getting and what is the right endpoint protection to have, or some of them don't even have that. So kind of like having conversation about threat intelligence with them probably not gonna have any kind of meaningful results. But there are some organizations that they've done tons of different things and they're trying to leverage. And so from your point of view, knowing how long you've been in the space, what you have seen, which organizations can benefit the most from implementing some robust threat intelligence platforms or programs?
I mean, you take any of the Fortune 500, for example, and pretty much they all make a thing, a widget, right? They all have some form of production environment. Even on the financial side, there's a production environment, right? So for any organization of any size, much to your point, I would say it's almost paramount at this point. I think 3-4 years ago, it was almost a nice to have. You'd put it at the end of your stack. You'd try to maybe enrich your SIM or, solution with threat intelligence to get a little bit better fidelity or confidence in an IOC, because you've wrapped it with threat intelligence that expands the kind of row further out that you're working with. But now I say it's much more paramount. And the way it's paramount is not just in the reactionary mode or even in the threat hunting mode of a SOC, but also in the strategic kind of planning mode. Like if I'm going to resource my organization with professionals with certain skills and stacks and tools, before I worry about that, I should actually start with threat intelligence that's relative to my industry and build up a very proactive plan to say, if I'm this type of industry and I know that these actors that are doing these type of overall tactics and with these motives against the current and most importantly future landscape, you have to tool for that proactively by design. And I think very few organizations, even the Fortune 50, take the time to set aside time and actually tabletop moving forward. And threat intelligence is very valuable in that strategic moment. It's valuable when you're putting together DRP plans or business continuity plans, incident response playbooks, building out your SOC. What tools and what stacks do you need? What kind of threat intelligence do you need? It should be germane to what you are as a business and what you know threat actors are doing to that vertical or type of business.
Thank you everyone for joining us for part 1, Cyber Talk with Nikolay on the threat intelligence with Scheferman. Stay tuned for part 2.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about these topics or IS Squared, please go to www.issquaredinc.com.